Hey guys, Adam here with Anabolic Climbing, and today we're going to go over probably over 20 different compounds and evaluate, are they worth testing for rock climbers? Am I going to try it? Am I thinking about it? No chance in hell. And we're also going to go through some of the philosophy I have in terms of health, in terms of dosing, and compound selection, and what trade-offs I would consider valuable versus not worth the risk. So with that said, let's jump into it. So as we go through this, we need to determine what's the most important. Do we tolerate weight gains? We know we're going to get strength if we take any sort of anabolics. What are the likelihoods that we're going to deal with injury? How is this going to affect our health markers? And what are some other side effects that might not be health related but could potentially impact us on the wall? So that could be cramping, that could be sweating, that could be maybe loss of oxygen carrying capacity. And to figure out, would this compound make sense for us as boulders, sport climbers, potentially trad climbers, but I'm going to focus it to speed. If you're doing big wall testing, I can't think of anything that you couldn't do naturally. Sure, you could go with like some of the EPOs and oxygen carrying capacity compounds, but we'll get there at another point. So as we go through this, we're going to talk about how easy are these things to take? Can you just take them over the counter? Should I do something to raise my natural testosterone production? Will these things potentially shut down my endocrine system when I come off? And as always, I'm almost 40, so anything I plan on doing will be way lower than what a bodybuilder would do. Bodybuilders potentially could take between half a gram to 1 gram of anabolics. Amateurs, if you get into the professional ranks, 2, 3, 4 plus. Nothing we're going to be talking about today is going to be anywhere close to half a gram. So the doses are going to be small, but the compound selection is very specific, and you guys are going to see why. So what am I definitely testing? The first thing I'm testing is testosterone. And there's a few reasons for this. Number one, it's bioidentical. When kept at smaller doses, like in the testosterone replacement therapy range, like 80 to 120 milligrams per week, shouldn't really see too many side effects at all. Potential for acne, not so likely on the hair loss. Blood pressure should be pretty stable. Something to look at and monitor with blood work, but nothing that I'm supremely worried about. It could be one of those scenarios where if I go up to 200 milligrams a week, which would be considered like first cycle territory, guys gain 15 to 20 pounds a year on low dose test. That's definitely a thing. And that's something I'm going to evaluate, but for the strength and recovery, it's definitely worth the test. I plan on doing that in February, but right now, and if we sort of go to the next one down, human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, is something that I've been taking now for the last couple of months. And I am a big fan. Popular fertility treatment definitely helps you recruit more swimmers, which is dope, but it'll also, think about it like a prohormone. It does a lot, or it signals the HPTA, or the hypothalamic pituitary axis, to basically produce as much testosterone as you naturally can. So you can hit super physiological levels with HCG. Usually if you go above 500 IUs, or really above 300, you might potentially hit super physiological ranges. I've been taking about 200 IUs for the past 2 months, starting to bump things up to about 450, and I'll keep you guys in the loop into any estrogenic signaling. But right now the recovery has been great. I went from having trouble climbing more than 3-4 times a week if I was lucky to 5, which feels really good, man. Big fan. And then as we move down the list to Anavar or oxandrolone, I like oxandrolone for a few reasons. I don't for one or two. The reasons I like it: helps you put on tissue, really good for helping with collagen synthesis. Burn patients receive oxandrolone all the time for recovery. It's definitely something that you can find in intensive care units, which is awesome. It's somewhat suppressive, so at higher doses it has been found to shut down your endocrine system, But at low doses, up to 20 milligrams, you might be okay. Should you run it without testosterone? Hell no. Do not advocate for that one bit. But in theory, you could. It's light enough on the androgenic signaling that women can take up to 5 milligrams of it. I'm not a fan of that, nor would I recommend it. But yeah, here you have this compound that is androgenic, helps with collagen synthesis, somewhat suppressive. What are the downsides? And it'll mess with your lipids really hard. And the part where it needs testing, and why I'm not ready to give it my full seal of approval yet, is because it potentially leads to pumps and cramps, which as a sport climber or a trad climber would be disastrous. Is it something we could take as a boulder, potentially? Don't know. But we have some third-party tested Anavar, and we're going to try it out and figure out if that's a compound that makes sense for climbers. On this list, going down one more, easily the least studied compound that I'm taking, and probably the only thing I'm willing to try that is understudied, is SLU-PP332. Estrogenic receptor agonist, hits the alpha, beta, and GABA receptors, which is super cool. It helps with oxygen carrying capacity. It's an exercise mimetic, meaning in the body it mimics exercise, so you could sit on your butt and still get some of the impact, which is cool. And it has been shown to impact grip strength, which is all things that we as climbers love. The downside, and also it's relatively side effect free. It showed no impact on blood work for rodent models. Folks that I've seen run this up to about 600 micrograms per day did not have any negative impacts on their blood work. The one thing that they did have is increased sweating and clammy hands, which we don't love, but, you know, we do have chalk. So is it a thing worth running? I'm going to try a 2-week trial of SLU-PP332. See how effective it is as a fat burner and for oxygen carrying capacity, and see how bad the sweating is on the hands. So far, it's felt a little bit like yohimbine, so, you know, you get some, like, very brief, mild nausea. Not serious, just something where it's like, all right, I feel weird for a second, and then I'm fine. I have noticed slight clammy hands, but nothing that I would really... If I didn't know to look for it, I haven't really noticed. Could it be one of those things that at higher body weights it impacts people more? Possibly. But before you go out and try to find some person that's selling it, be mindful. I'm going to do a deep dive on all this stuff later. It's not super well researched, but it is something worth considering and why I'm testing it. Creatine, you should take it. Don't even have to consider it. It's studied to death. It's efficacious. You can't OD on it. It's great for the creatine phosphate system, which is dope for boulders, doing hard moves. Big fan, super studied. There's no reason not to take creatine for performance. Also a great nootropic for cognitive health. Carnitine. I love L-carnitine. I have been taking injectable carnitine now for probably almost a year, about 9 months. Really helped me personally with energy. I've been chronically tired for probably 25 years, and 3 days into my injectable carnitine treatment, I felt normal, which was a godsend. Sent my first and second B7 on carnitine. It helps with energy capacity, cool fertility treatment. It pretty darn safe. I've seen 2 adverse reactions to carnitine, both of which for its dopaminergic effects. But in general, I would say that carnitine is pretty darn safe. It's probably already in your pre-workout, and definitely something worth experimenting with orally. If you are going to go the anabolic route and you're going to start taking injectables, the reason I suggest starting with carnitine is, number one, it's an amino acid. So if you screw up a pin, not really that big of a deal. Number two, if you can get consistent pinning carnitine, you'll be fine with your HCG or testosterone. I think that's dope. And number three, it's a great way to test injectables without having to potentially worry about shutting down your endocrine system. And like I said, if you accidentally hit a vein, it's an amino acid, no big deal, you'll be fine. Huge fan of carnitine. Will it work as well for you? Unclear. A lot of people don't like the injection pain. I don't like it orally because I have a really sensitive stomach, but it's a dope compound. Big fan. Terkestrone, ectosterone. Anecdotally, I have found that the cardio impacts on these are really cool. I've ran this a few times, one time for 3 months at a time, one time for 6 months at a time. I have trouble sleeping on it, but I do enjoy running Turk and Ecti. I'm considering trying running it again at a later time. Right now, I haven't had it for probably 3 months. I wouldn't rush out to buy it, but it's definitely a thing that if you're on the fence about it and you want to try it out, by all means, it's not going to shut you down. Again, hits the estrogen receptor agonist or estrogen receptor axis, which is cool, helps promote collagen synthesis. Yeah, jury's out on it. I like it. I might be in the minority. So what am I on the fence about taking and why? Nandrolone or Deca helps with the joint lubrication, which I'm a big fan of, helps with strength. It was one of the first anabolics that was really used for strength training. Asked the Romanian Olympic weightlifting team. And yeah, it'll make you stronger. I'm on the fence about it because of the bloating. Also, it's a 19-nor testosterone derivative, and all 19-nors have potential downsides to your neurological health. And this is something I'm pretty mindful of. Things like mood swings, in some cases being exposed to 19-nors just makes you stupider. While Deca is pretty safe and well tolerated, especially at low doses, it's worth a consideration. I'm not super gung-ho on it. I'm like a 30-70 on trying it. It's definitely something that if someone was going to trial anabolics, it's a thing worth running for a period of time to consider. I'm just not that sold on it yet, but time will tell. Moving down the list to growth hormone. I like it for the skeletal muscle insurance. I like it for the improved sleep quality. I'm on the fence about it because of the bloating and the water retention. I don't want to carry around another 10 to 15 pounds of water. I think that could be a real problem. I might consider testing it just to see how bad the bloat would be on a lighter person. For what it's worth, I do know climbers that take growth hormone, not because they're playing with anabolics like I am, but because they're prepubertal, and this basically helps them basically speed up and incite their puberty process, which is dope. My buddy literally went from being a child to like, oh damn, he grew up. How old was that kid? In a matter of 2 months. So he hasn't had any issues with the bloating, but it's something to be mindful of, especially if you start going in super physiological doses. Next up on the list is turinabol, the only steroid that was specifically made for athletes. People talk about feeling really strong on turinabol, and it's definitely something I'm considering for that reason. The reason I'm on the fence about it as opposed to all in on it, because in theory it's one of the things that I think climbers could run, it's an oral, is I don't think it's better than Anavar. I don't know if it has the cramping. I'm going to be doing a deep dive, like I said, into every compound here. But I'm like 40-60 on turinabol. It's a possibility, but not something I'm super hyped on. Primobolan, on the other hand, can limit some of the estrogen signaling if you are getting, or if you're a little too high on the testosterone, which is super cool. Improves collagen synthesis, super cool. Really rough to the hair follicles, not that cool. But in general, probably one of the most tolerated anabolics, and Primobolan's awesome. I am like 60 or 70% on running low-dose Primobolan, maybe at like 80 milligrams. It's definitely a thing to consider. That and Masteron, you could realistically run either. I don't think Masteron is as good with the collagen synthesis, but again, if you're taking excess testosterone, it's a nice way of limiting your estrogenic production without shutting it down completely. And as for Dianolone, it's apparently awesome in deep cuts. I've heard of a few folks that ran it on deep cuts, had great cosmetic effects, kept their strength, kept a lot of muscle tissue. Again, though, I don't know when I'm going to source it. If there's more data on it, I'd consider it. Right now, it just seems nifty. I don't hear about many S-tier anabolics from hardcore bodybuilders, and yeah, I would like to learn more about this one, but I'm on the fence. So now, let's transition to the stuff that I'm absolutely not taking for, in some cases, very obvious reasons, in other cases, not so much. The bodybuilding internet sure loves Trenbolone, and I understand why. The recomping effect on it is pretty legendary. Think Hugh Jackman in The Wolverine, and yeah, it's an incredible compound for making you look epic. It's also pretty good for collagen synthesis. A case could be made for Trenbolone. So if on paper it looks dope, why am I not willing to touch it? And remember earlier how I talked about the 19-nor testosterone derivatives? Jesus Christ. To say that Trenbolone is neurotoxic is such an understatement. A lot of guys sort of report being in the state of vigilance, being unable to sleep, developing mild paranoia, awful night sweats. I've heard of guys switching sexual preferences and just getting into like absolute degenerate behavior. So, oof. As someone who is happily married, divorce in a bottle is not high on my list. But Godspeed to anyone who insists of trying to play with fire and play with Tren. Winstrol. For both Winstrol and Equipoise, the reason I have zero interest in both is because they're extremely suppressive to estrogen signaling. So in Winstrol's case, and I also think EQ, what happens is you will still facilitate collagen synthesis, but the lattice structure of the tendons gets worse. So you will have more weakened tendons. So people that take these things, you dry out, you look lean, so on paper, it seems like a cool thing, but you feel like glass. There have been reports of folks getting severe tendon injuries, which for me is just an absolute no-no. If you went to my last video where the Iranian climber popped for Winstrol, this is why I was really surprised in that compound selection. For Anadrol and for Superdrol, I think it's, if you want to add an oral for funsies, I guess you could. It's just really liver toxic, and I don't... Not a lot of upside for a lot of downside. Not too interested. Trestolone side effects are too high. And do SARMs make you more muscular? Sure. Do SARMs make you more muscular than anabolic steroids? No. So why would I choose to run a SARM over any of the compounds I'm considering trying when the side effect burden is way higher? I've had friends develop night blindness on SARMs. It's really scary stuff. I am really not a fan. So, yeah, SARMs are gross. If you want to try them, and document it, I guess Godspeed, but it's a big thumbs down from me. And by the way, everything we've talked about so far is just surrounding muscle growth and androgenic signaling. We could talk about blood doping, EPO and hematocrit, tadalafil, or otherwise known as Cialis, arginine, all to promote blood flow. Then you could use things like Cardarine, T3, and Clen for fat loss. I won't be touching any of the last three. Tadalafil could be a good time. There is no shortage of compounds that we could review to figure out what would be good for climbing and what wouldn't. I could be here all day. But, for the first, or at least for tadalafil and arginine, keep an eye out. We're going to test those at some point. I think those could be really cool for sport climbing. And just to do a very brief recap, I think testosterone or HCG could potentially be really interesting for sport climbers, speed climbers, or boulderers. Anabar definitely has potential for boulderers, also maybe for speed climbing. I do think Turinabol could also be in that conversation. Creatine's for everyone, carnitine's for everyone. SLUPP could be really exciting, but I'm not willing to do or to put my name on anything until there are more human trials that are done. And yeah, in hindsight, or rather in conclusion, we're testing all of these things. Short-term duration is ideal. I'll be showing my 4 previous lab works as well as all of the other stuff going forward. Same with organ imaging. All of the compounds that I source on third-party testing because I am paranoid as all hell. And if there are any compounds that you think could be interesting for rock climbing that I haven't mentioned, let me know. I value my health, which is a hilarious thing to say as I talk about testing random compounds over the internet, over really going balls to the wall on a lot of these compounds, but we'll see how it's all reflected in the blood work. Right now, natural climbers are at the top, and I think that's awesome. I think keeping our sport natural is amazing. I know for a fact you don't need to take steroids or anabolics to rock climb. The question is for those of us that are interested in taking the next leap and figuring out what pharmacology can do for our climbing, what makes sense and what doesn't. And that's why I'm here. I'll keep you guys in the loop. With that said, thank you so much. If for whatever reason you've made it this far into the video, please like and subscribe and share. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to answer below. I will be posting sources for all of the compound deep dives that we do going forward. And yeah, again, this is Adam with Anabolic Climbing. Have fun, sun hard, and have a great day.